They sold the house I saved but forgot one thing. I now own the deed. And I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was their reckoning. They sold the house. My house. After I paid off every dime of their $280,000 debt. My name is Kelsey Monroe. And if you're watching this, ask yourself, have you ever been used by your blood like a walking wallet? It was a Wednesday. The sun was just beginning to slip behind the pine trees that framed our porch, the porch I had spent my entire life calling home. I had just come off my second shift at the hospital, body aching, mind drained, but proud. The night before, my mother had sobbed in my arms, thanking me for saving the family. My father, who had never hugged me growing up, wrapped me in an embrace so tight I almost believed it meant something. "You're our hero," he whispered. I believed him. I believed them. I thought, finally I mattered. I stepped out of my car, the smell of pine in the air, a smile still stitched across my face from last night's gratitude. But something was wrong. The curtains were gone. The driveway was empty. The flower beds my mom used to obsess over were torn up. I ran to the front door. The door was unlocked. The house was gutted. On the polished hardwood floor, where our family portrait used to hang above the fireplace, sat a white envelope. My name was scribbled across it in my father's unmistakable scrawl. "Thanks for fixing our credit, loser. We moved to Florida with your brother. Don't call. No signature. No remorse." Just that, my knees buckled. I sank onto the floor, heart hollowed out, and then I dragged myself to the porch like a ghost. Neighbors passed by and waved, like everything was normal. I wanted to scream, to burn something down. I wanted to throw bricks through every memory I had shared within those four walls, but I didn't. I smiled, because they didn't know the one thing that changed everything. When I paid off the house last week, I had quietly transferred the deed into my name. Every signature, every notarized form, every filed document bore my name. Legally, the house was mine. The sale they tried to pull off wasn't valid. And in 24 hours, they were about to learn what it means to betray the wrong daughter. They didn't just steal money. They stole my sense of belonging. They stabbed me with guilt and wrapped it in affection. I wasn't just robbed, I was discarded like junk mail, used like a checkbook. But I had stopped trusting their words months ago. 6 months earlier, I was sleeping in my car after a 12-hour shift. My ex had kicked me out, and the friend who was letting me crash had a new boyfriend who made it clear I was overstaying my welcome. I remember the night. Rain thudded on the roof of my Honda. I was clutching a vending machine sandwich when my phone buzzed. "Kelsey," Mom's voice was frantic. "We're going to lose the house. Your father, he made some bad investments. We're $280,000 in the hole. The same house I was raised in. The porch where I had my 5th birthday. The kitchen table was where I learned to braid my hair. The stairs I tiptoed down every Christmas. Losing it felt like losing a limb. What happened to the money Grandpa left you?" There was a pause. Then Mom sniffled. "We used it to help your brother start his business. You know how hard it's been for Evan." Of course, Evan, the golden child, the one who crashed every car, failed every job, and cheated on every girlfriend, but was always forgiven, always saved. But still, I couldn't let the house go. I couldn't watch my childhood home vanish into foreclosure. So I drained my savings, maxed out my credit cards, and took out a personal loan I would be repaying for the next 10 years. I walked into the family kitchen with a folder full of cashier's checks. Dad went silent. Mom dropped to her knees. "You're an angel," she whispered. "They made me dinner, took pictures, posted about it like I had returned from war.me. I was just happy to be noticed." That was the part that stung the most. I wasn't just robbed of money. I was robbed of the illusion that they loved me the way they loved him. But that illusion was dead. Now, as I stood on my empty front lawn, I felt no tears, no rage, only power. While they were packing for their Florida fantasy, I was filing title transfers. The next morning, I walked into the county title office in dark glasses and a hoodie. I wasn't hiding. I was preparing the stage, Miss Monroe, the clerk said, smiling. She slid a thick manila envelope across the counter. "Everything's official. The sale your parents attempted is void. The property is still legally yours." I nodded. Calm on the outside, but inside? Fire. The buyers had already wired the money to my parents. But since the deed was never in their name, the transaction was a felony. Fraud. I didn't want them arrested. Not yet. Jail would be mercy. I wanted them humiliated, cornered, stripped of the comfort they stole. Later that evening, I called the sheriff's office and reported the attempted fraudulent sale. I emailed the buyer's agent, attaching scanned copies of every official document. Within 2 hours, the sale was frozen. The moving trucks turned around, but my parents were already gone. They thought they were sipping margaritas in Boca Raton. Instead, they were about to find out their dream home didn't exist, their bank account about to be seized. And Evan? Well, Evan was about to learn that when you build your future on deception, it collapses like sand. I didn't text. I didn't call. I posted one thing to Facebook. If you ever feel like you've been used, don't get angry. Get smart. And always read the deed. Then I turned off notifications. Let them wonder. Let them spiral. That night, I sat alone in the empty living room, a place once filled with noise, and I laughed because I wasn't the girl who begged to be loved anymore. I was the woman who owned the house, and they were just squatters in a dream that no longer belonged to them. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to savor it every hour. My parents and brother thought they had won, while the truth tightened like a noose. They believed they had rid themselves of me. What they didn't know was that they had only freed me. At T6:42 am, I brewed coffee in the silent kitchen. It echoed in the empty house like a drumbeat of war. I pulled out my laptop and opened every document I'd ever filed in the last 6 months. Everything was airtight. Every form notarized. Every form time-stamped. The house was mine, and their hands were nowhere near it legally or morally. I started with the sheriff's office. The woman on the phone was polite but curt until she read the documents I emailed. "This isn't just unauthorized," she said. "This is criminal." I nodded. "I don't want them arrested." A pause. "What do you want, Miss Monroe?" "Consequences." Next, I called the buyer's agent. You own the property?" The voice on the other end stammered. "Since last week," I replied. "We already transferred funds." "You transferred funds to fraudsters. Your client's legal recourse is with them." Within 2 hours, the sale was frozen. The buyers were furious. Their dream retirement villa in Florida gone. My parents had likely already cashed a check and started spending. But money moves slower than karma. The fallout began with missed calls. First, from a Florida number, then another. By evening, I had 7. Then came Evan. His first voicemail was a masterpiece of manipulation and rage. "You need to fix this, Kelsey. You ruined everything. Mom's having chest pains. Dad's threatening to sue. You've got 1 day before we take legal action." Legal action. On a home I paid for. After being conned with hugs and crocodile tears, I smiled as I played the message again, sipping coffee and letting it echo off the bare walls. Then I typed out a group text. "Per Florida law, attempting to sell a property you don't own is fraud. I have full documentation. The sale is void. The funds will be returned to the buyers. The house is still mine. Since you left so quickly, I assumed you wouldn't mind me changing the locks." Silence. 3 hours passed. Then another voicemail. Mom this time. Crying, but different. This wasn't a save us cry. This was the sound of pride imploding. "Sweetie, we made a mistake. We were just trying to start over. Your dad didn't mean what he wrote in that letter. He panicked. Can we talk?" "Talk? You don't talk to someone who stabs you while hugging you. You let them bleed out on their blade." I didn't reply. Instead, I called the HOA, reported unauthorized listing activity, sent city records a flagged update. I wasn't acting out of rage. I was acting out of control. Because when your own family weaponizes your love, you stop being their daughter. You become their reckoning. Evan cracked first. He always does. Pressure hits him like a match to dry grass. He called from a restricted number. I answered. Said nothing. Kelsey. His voice was raw, broken. Claire left me, took the kids, said she can't be married to a financially reckless man-child. She found the letter Dad wrote you, the one that said, "Thanks for fixing our credit, loser." She called me a parasite. I said nothing. Let him unravel. Mom and Dad are sleeping on an air mattress in Uncle Brian's basement. He said they can't stay past next week. They want to come back to the house. I exhaled slowly. There is no way, Evan. You made that clear when you watched me drain my account and didn't even say thank you. Silence. Then, softly, "They're your parents, Kels. You're going to leave them on the street?" I smiled. Funny. That's exactly what they did to me. That was the final fracture. And no more pretending. I wasn't their golden goose anymore. I was the hammer. Over the next week, I began the transformation. New locks, new furniture, new paint. I walked down the hallway that had once held my childhood height. Marks penciled on the trim and painted it sky blue. Not because I hated my past, because I was done letting it haunt me. Then came a call from their lawyer. Calm, neutral voice. "Male, Miss Monroe. Your parents are requesting an amicable resolution, perhaps some form of restitution. Did they tell you they left me homeless 5 years ago? That they said Evan needed his privacy more than I needed a roof?" Silence. "No, Miss Monroe. They didn't mention that." I hung up. I didn't need court justice. I had something better. Control. Peace. They could chase papers all they wanted. The foundation was mine. The mortgage in my name. The fake fantasy they'd built in Florida. It turned to ash the day the moving truck came to my house. I stood on the porch in leggings and a hoodie, barefoot, sipping iced coffee like it was communion. Neighbors waved. Some came over. "Are your parents moving back in?" I smiled. "No, just cleaning out the past, making space for a future that belongs to me." Inside, I opened the hallway closet. Mom's old wedding album, Evan's high school trophies, Dad's dusty box of unpaid insurance and unfiled taxes. I boxed it all, labeled it, returned to sender, taped it shut, then drove it to Uncle Brian's. The house smelled of stale coffee and old regret. Uncle Brian opened the door. Behind him, I saw them. Mom's hair was frizzy. Dad's eyes were hollow. Evan sat on the floor in sweatpants, scrolling like a ghost. I didn't step inside. I set the box on the porch. Dad reached for it, something flickering in his eyes. "Kelsey, you should have just said thank you, instead of treating me like your savings account." Mom opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She looked thinner, not from grief, from having to finally carry her own weight. I turned. "Kelsey, wait." Evan called. I paused. "What are we supposed to do now?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Figure it out, like I always had to." And I laughed. No screaming, no tears, just footsteps fading into their silence. Some reckonings arrive with thunder. Mine came with silence. It had been 3 days since I dropped the box at Uncle Brian's porch, 3 days since I looked Evan in the eye and said the most honest words I'd ever spoken. Figure it out, like I always had to. No one called, no one texted, but I could feel them unraveling from a distance. The silence wasn't peace for them. It was a storm. For me, it was clarity. The lawyer called again. This time, his tone was clipped. "Miss Monroe, your family is willing to forego any claim if you agree to release a portion of the equity in the house, a small settlement. Did they tell you I was living in my car when they called me for help?" Another pause. "They said you were doing well, that you were a nurse." I was a nurse who worked 12-hour shifts and slept in a Honda Civic outside a Walgreens. He cleared his throat. "They didn't mention that. Then we have nothing to discuss." I ended the call. The next day, I filed paperwork to block any further claims on the title. Let them try. I had documentation. I had facts. And for the first time in my life, I had the upper hand. I transformed the house day by day. Each stroke of paint, each new piece of furniture was a declaration. This was no longer their home. This was my sanctuary. But closure, like grief, doesn't arrive all at once. It drips in slow, aching moments. That Sunday, I was sorting through the attic when I found it. A box labeled Kells. Inside were my report, cards, ballet shoes, drawings, and a journal I hadn't seen since I was 14. On the last page was a letter I had written to myself. Dear future me, if you ever feel small, remember, you are not invisible. You're just surrounded by people who choose not to see you. Love, Kelsey. I sat there, cross-legged on the dusty floor, tears slipping down my cheeks. I wasn't crying for them. I was crying for her. The girl who had begged for scraps of love and thought they were enough. Later that night, while sipping chamomile tea on the front steps, I got a message. Not from Evan. Not from Mom or Dad, from Claire. Subject line: I know everything and I'm sorry. She wrote about their first night in Florida, how my parents treated her like unpaid help, how they mocked her for suggesting a budget, how they expected her to cook and clean while they blew through what remained of the stolen money on cruise brochures and overpriced drinks. She had found the letter, the one that broke everything. She confronted Evan. He blamed me. I thought Evan was a man, she wrote, but he's just your father with a younger face. And you're the only one who ever showed integrity. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Woman to woman. I didn't reply. Not out of hate, but because I was finally protecting the one person I should have always protected, me. A few days later, I walked downtown for groceries. I passed a man sitting by the fountain, ragged clothes, distant stare. For a moment, my breath caught. He looked like my father. Same slumped shoulders, same hollow eyes. It wasn't him, but it could have been. And that was enough to remind me of the cost of betrayal. They were no longer part of my world. They were shadows behind a locked door. That evening, I opened the hallway closet, the one I used to hide in when they fought. I lit a single candle, stood barefoot, and whispered into the quiet. I did the right thing. Not because they were suffering, but because I had stopped. Stopped begging to be loved, stopped paying to belong, stopped handing out second chances like spare change. They thought they taught me strength through suffering, but I found my strength in walking away. Healing doesn't always arrive with forgiveness. Sometimes it arrives with boundaries. Weeks passed. The silence from my family stretched longer, colder. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was light. No calls, no texts, no false apologies wrapped in guilt. Just stillness, a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. I filled the house with music, not to drown out the past, but to celebrate its end. Nina Simone, Brandi Carlile, Mahalia. Each note echoed through the halls like a blessing. I planted lavender in the backyard. I replaced the faded shutters. I repainted the room that used to be Evan's, turning it into a guest room with warm light and an ocean blue throw blanket for visitors who meant their words, who didn't measure love in transactions. I hosted my first dinner party in early spring. Just 4 people, 2 nurse friends, my ceramics instructor, and a woman named Marlene I'd met in a memoir writing class. We toasted to freedom. We laughed. We told stories that had nothing to do with survival. That night, after everyone left, I sat on the front steps with a glass of wine. The porch light cast a soft halo over the path I had built, brick by brick, decision by decision. And then I got a letter. Not an email, a real letter. The handwriting was unfamiliar, neat, feminine. It was from Claire. She wrote, I know you didn't respond, and I respect that. I just needed to say thank you. Not for what you did to them, but for what you did for yourself. It permitted me to do the same. She ended it with, if one day you ever want a coffee, just coffee, I'd be honored. No apologies, no strings, just women who survived the same hurricane. I set the letter on the windowsill, next to the orchid Mom used to say was too delicate to bloom. It was blooming now, bright, resilient, alive. One evening in late April, I got a phone call from an unknown number. I almost declined it, but something told me to answer. Kelsey Monroe? Yes, this is Detective Shaw with the Fraud Unit. We've been investigating a series of financial transactions involving your parents. Your documentation helped us freeze an account they were using to collect additional deposits. You did the right thing. I thanked her, hung up, sat there in my living room with the sun setting through the new curtains, and felt it closure. Not because they were facing consequences, but because I had finally stopped needing an apology. I lit a fire in the backyard pit, burned the letter Dad had written, the one with loser scribbled at the end, watched the flames eat through the ink until it disappeared completely. Then I danced barefoot on the grass. The house was no longer a symbol of grief. It was a monument to survival and me. I wasn't the nurse who drained her savings to be noticed. I wasn't the child who begged to be loved. I was Kelsey Monroe, homeowner, healer, and no longer theirs. I didn't destroy them. They destroyed themselves. I just stopped saving them and reclaimed every piece of myself in the process.